In our broadcast this week, we're going to be looking at Revelation chapter 17. I'm not sure that 17 and 18 progress the chronology at all. It seems to be information that perhaps is being filling throughout the tribulation period. And so it's kind of backtracking a little bit, filling in some details that are very helpful to us. But chapter 17 and 18 and 19 of Revelation is about judgment. It's about a judgment on the kingdom of Satan and the judgment on the kingdom of the Antichrist. So in chapter 17, we're going to look this week at the judgment on the religious system that the Antichrist is part of and Satan has fostered on the earth. Chapter 18 will be a judgment upon the economic system, the business world, that has become part and parcel of the Antichrist kingdom and system. And then finally, we look at a destruction of the military might of the Antichrist, Satan's army, more or less, as it comes out in all of its power against Christ himself as he returns and they fail miserably. So judgment on the religious, economic, and military might of the Antichrist backed by Satan. This is where we're going in the next three chapters. As we return to chapter 17, though, it says, "Then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came." Now remember, those are the last judgments that were poured out, the seven bowl judgments. "And one of them came and spoke to me, saying, 'Come here, and I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters.'" And so we see the judgments that are going to be unfolded for us in this particular text. In verse 2 it says, "With whom the kings of the earth committed acts of immorality, and those who dwell on the earth were made drunk with the wine of her immorality, and he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness." Now before we look at the details of this judgment, or at least the individuals that are part of this judgment, let's first of all look in verse 3 when it says that he carried me away in the spirit. 4 different times in the book of Revelation we have this type of rhetoric, being carried away in the spirit, of being in the spirit. And each of those times that happens, we have a turning point in the book of Revelation. So I'd like to look at that with you. Chapter 1, verse 10, in the opening scenes of the book of Revelation, we find that just prior to the coming of the tribulations, or actually of the messages to the seven churches, we find that John is in the Spirit. It says in verse 10, "I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, and I heard behind me a loud voice with the sound of a trumpet." So these are the things that were going on at that particular time. John is going to get a revelation, a revealing of the greatness of Christ himself in chapter 1. Then he gives a lot of messages to seven churches that were in existence at that time in what is modern-day Turkey. That's chapters 2 and 3. And then we go over a little bit later on in the book, we find a second time, chapter 4, verse 2, and just prior to the tribulation period, and we get there with you, chapter 4, verse 2, the messages to the seven churches have been given, and now we're going to begin talking about the tribulation period. And in chapter 4, verse 2, it says, "Immediately I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne is standing." Now, we have in chapters 4 and 5 this picture of heaven, this great worship service of the Father and the Son. And John is now in the Spirit once again to receive that kind of information. And then he moves into chapter 6, all the way through chapter 19, looking at what takes place during the tribulation period and that which follows, and the coming of Christ, and the setting up of the kingdom. Then we have this one in chapter 17, verse 3. This is the third one. And he says, "I was in the Spirit in the wilderness, and I saw a woman standing with a scarlet beast." And so we're now looking at the judgments that's going to come on the Antichrist and his system. And that's a third turning point in the book. And then we have a final time this happens, chapter 21 and verse 10. And this is just prior to the eternal state. It says in chapter 21 verse 10, "And he carried me away in the Spirit to a great and high mountain, and showed me a holy city, Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God." So now he's going to talk about the New Jerusalem and life in the New Jerusalem. And this time, once again, for the fourth time, he is in the Spirit. So what we have going on here is John is either being taken in a spiritual sense to heaven and seeing these events, or he is having visions and revelations from God that he describes as in the spirit, even as his body stays located on the Isle of Patmos. It doesn't matter much which it is. We do see these four hinges and shifting points in the book of Revelation as important information is given to us at those junctures. So that's where we are in chapter 17, which we'll pick up tomorrow in trying to look more about what's going on with this kingdom of the Antichrist. I hope you can join us. You have a wonderful day in the Lord.